All right, welcome everybody to the Liberty Block Live for April 5th, 2020. I'm Mike Sanella with co-host Dan Rice. Today we've got
Hello, everyone.
today we've got yet another one topic agenda, which is coronavirus. And we actually decided that we wanted to try to open up with something a little bit different today. In the midst of all of the government ordered shutdowns, there are still some businesses that we like and that are still open at the local level. So Dan, we haven't reached out to these companies. We're just doing this completely of our own. Dan, you wanted to plug something in your community real quick.
I have a local restaurant that we actually went to yesterday. I'm in New River, which is north of Phoenix, Arizona, and in New River, Desert Hills area, we have a great Mexican restaurant called Los Encantos Dos, which is the second one. And my son and I went there yesterday, had no trouble. They aren't seating people, but parking lot was full. Everyone's calling their orders in, and they're still providing the great Mexican food that they're known for.
Cool. And I'm from New
So go
Milford.
visit them if you have a chance.
Yep. I'm in Cookeville, Tennessee, but I'm from New Milford, Connecticut, where we have some of the more draconian shut mandates across the country. And, I'm just going to go ahead and plug the local hardware store over in New Milford, Connecticut. So if you're joining us from New Milford, Connecticut, either in my stream on YouTube, which is the Captain Phoenix channel, so you guys can go ahead and check that out, or on Facebook. H.H. Taylor and Son on 85 Railroad Street in New Milford, Connecticut, still open for business, and you won't have to deal with all of the nonsense you deal with at Home Depot, especially now in these trying times. So go ahead and give them some business. So from that, I actually want to naturally segue into an interesting story. Their owners I've talked with their owners actually, and they've actually said that although in the first week, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, they were hit pretty hard from the lack of business, what they've found is that people are, painting their rooms, they're building bookshelves, they're getting bored. So their paint department's actually done incredibly well, and their numbers are actually above where they normally would be this time of year because everybody's bored at home and, doing work on their home. So I thought that was an interesting story, is that they've actually improved their business slightly over the last week or so, over from year to year. But the real story that we want to get into to start off was the one I wanted to do last week, but didn't have the time really to get into. And that is the news, and it's kind of old news now, that Boris Johnson, who's a prime minister for the United Kingdom, has COVID. And upon that announcement,
Oh, no. So who takes over for him?
well, the issue that the left have been crying about is you guys can see the response right here. And these are some older responses, but still 9,900 likes, 685 shares. How did you get tested before the NHS staff? This other one has get well soon, sending you the best wishes from the Javid family and Bailey. And of course the response, in addition to wishing him well, you should be using your position to highlight how he got test priority over the NHS staff. This one right here. My mother-in-law was rushed into the hospital last week. We still haven't had results back, and she passed away yesterday. Why did your test come back so quickly and ours hasn't? 7,400 likes and over 1,000 shares. The response from the left has been absolutely endless about how does he get testing and the rest of us don't. And of course, the worst of it all is this tweet here that has 2,000 likes and 376 shares. Boris Johnson dying from COVID-19. Share this meme to help him die faster. So the response from the left has been just utterly ridiculous. And Dan, we talked about this earlier in the week.
These are the compassionate guys, right?
Yeah, these are the ones that have compassion and are the tolerant left that understand trade-offs. Like, of course, the prime minister had primacy when it came to getting testing. We talked about this earlier this week.
Yeah, he as leader of the country, wouldn't you think it might be a good idea to keep him healthy? Do they not have like a Secret Service type situation in England?
Yeah,
So they can protect him from a bullet, but they can't ensure that he's healthy when he potentially could have something.
What do you think Bernie Sanders would do? Like if Bernie Sanders were president today, do you think Bernie Sanders
He'd
is
ask
damn near
us for
80 years old?
$10 so he could go buy a test kit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean it's called a trade-off. You have this thing called scarcity. When there is this thing called scarcity, you have to make things like trade-offs, and you have to assign. And the best way to do that is to assign, values to everything. Excuse me. Which, by the way, is why actuaries exist. And this is a post.
That, yeah.
This is a post my friend Jeremy Kaufman put. It was a response. It was flippant, I suppose, but I suspect you're hinting that this is wrong somehow. But of course, old lives are worth less. And of course, this is the outrage police joining in on this. So I'm not going to read the response here that Ben Bryant put on him. But the idea here is that they just don't quite understand how economics works. And Dan, if you want to roll off on this one. Sorry, that's the wrong one.
Like you just said, actuarial. The reason why you can't buy $1 million policy of life insurance at age 60 is because there's a chance you could die the day after that you buy that policy. They don't have time to make their money back on it, so it's not the pleasant thing to think about, but an older life is worth less from that point in time forward. They're not judging the value of life itself, but rather the value that you're going to produce. And you would think from a socialist mind, they would be all over the value you're going to produce for society.
Of course.
Essentially, a 20-year-old has, nowadays people working in their 70s, 20-year-old has 50 working years. That's a lot of value that they're creating for society. A 65-year-old, could retire 5 years from now.
Yeah.
So they don't have as much value.
So what everybody's looking at now is a chart from a research paper that came out. Let me look up exactly when this was. This was a research paper from, that was the Economic Journal. This is from the Journal of, the Journal of the American Institute for Economic Research, and who found that, if you give people a very basic economics test, some interesting data about how the left lines up here with, so the scores you're seeing here are the number of questions each party got wrong out of the 8 questions that were asked. Yeah, this is, let me go to the agenda here so I can keep Dan up. So this is item
the
D,
one right after Jeremy's
as in
comment.
David. Yeah. And if you scroll down to one of the last pages there, it'll show this this chart here. So the total number incorrect on average for Democrats was 4.59. Republicans was 1.61, and there's us fellow libertarians at 1.26. So when we say the left doesn't understand economics, it's empirically evidenceable. It's evidently true. It's not something that we're saying callously. There's actual data to support this. That the Democrats just don't understand economics, which is what we're getting here.
Who put this survey on?
Oh, this is done by the. Let me go back to that again real quick. This was done by the
Economic Research.
Yeah, the American Journal. Sorry, the Journal of the American Institute for Economic Research. Say that 10 times fast.
All right.
Yeah. So actual data that shows that Democrats just don't understand economics, and that in these trying times that there is an economic trade-off. And this is what you and I have been saying, that at some point shutting down the entire country is going to have an impact that needs to be weighed against the impact of, coronavirus in the first place.
Right.
So, at some point, you have to say to yourself, when is the response more damaging than the thing itself?
Right.
So there's been a lot of criticism too about that in terms of that response about Donald Trump's. How Donald Trump has handled all of this. And, to give you an idea of, where things have been, Senator Green actually put together this timeline of what the response has been for the Trump administration. It's a little over 3 minutes. I'm going to let him go. And Dan, if you've got that video ready to follow along. Oh shit! I never emailed you that video. Well,
that's all right. I'll listen to it.
Will you be able to hear it?
I'm incredibly disappointed in the politicization of this COVID-19 response. The 24/7 criticism the president is undergoing is unwarranted at a minimum and absolutely maligns the hard work done over years as our nation's doctors and scientists at places like the CDC, the NIH, the FDA, the HHS, DHS, FEMA, and DOD have prepared for just such an eventuality. Make no mistake about it, this virus is a serious problem. But that concern was immediately shown by our president as evidenced by his historic response. And I'd like to take a second to correct the record. On December 31st, Wuhan officials posted the first notice saying they were investigating a pneumonia outbreak. On January the 7th, the CDC established an incident management system just 7 days later. On January the 17th, CDC sent 100-plus staffers to specific airports in the United States to screen all people coming from Wuhan. On January the 21st, just 3 weeks after the announcement, the CDC activated its Emergency Operations Center. On January the 29th, the President established the Presidential Task Force. On January the 30th, still less than a month from the initial announcement, the State Department issued a do not travel warning to China. January the 30th, the World Health Organization announced that the coronavirus is a public health emergency of international concern, meaning before the World Health Organization even announced a global concern, the administration was working on its response for almost a month and had already established a presidential task force. On January the 31st, to the cries of racism, President Trump proactively suspended entry of foreign nationals who'd been to China in the last 14 days. On the 31st, the president issued quarantines and, through Secretary Azar, a public health emergency for the entire nation. On February the 11th, the World Health Organization named the virus COVID-19. Let that sink in. The administration's first response a week after the Wuhan announcement. The virus hadn't even been named by the World Health Organization yet. It isn't named until day 42. Meanwhile, the CDC, the NIH, and all the agencies of our scientific community with acronyms that boggle the mind have been working feverishly to sequence the RNA of the virus, get its proteins, messenger RNA sequenced, and get a vaccine going. On February the 24th, the president unveiled the initial plan. According to the leadership of the other party, our president has failed us. Months of response, and yet they're accusing our president of failing us. On February the 26th, the president appointed the vice president to head the whole of government response. That appointment is in keeping with the 2015 Obama-era Blue Ribbon panel on biodefense. On February 29th, 60 days after the Chinese announcement, sadly, America lost its first victim to COVID-19. So 53 days before America lost a single life to COVID-19, the administration was already working diligently to prepare our country. America will lose lives to this virus. But as was noted by Obama appointee and former director of the CDC, Tom Friedman, had the president not responded so quickly, we would not have been prepared as we are, and more lives would have been lost.
So hopefully that gives everybody a good idea of the timeline that has that the response has led to at this point, and where we are today, and what the Trump administration has done since December 31st, when the Chinese finally stopped lying to us and told us that, hey, we have this thing, it could be a problem. And, you know, of course, at the time, nobody thought that this was a big deal when it came out in January. And even the Democrats' response, which we'll get to in a moment, was through March a complete push aside. Like, go ahead.
And I'm sure the Chinese even underplayed even when they finally admitted it. I'm sure it was greatly underplayed, as they always do, because they have to be superior to everybody else, so they possibly couldn't be responsible.
Right. And I'm sure you've seen this meme too now that's going around the internet that President Trump called it a hoax. And, my opinion is, okay, so what is he doing now? What has he done since then? What is the actual political ramifications? What is the policy ramifications? So even if that's true, which even Snopes, the ultra left-wing Snopes, will not confirm this claim. And in fact, they were happy to post the entire transcript, which we're showing to you guys right now. And I'm going to actually have to blow this up so I can read it for you guys. But here's the transcript from his February 28th, 2020. It was a rally that he held in South Carolina. Now, the Democrats are... I can't do a Trump voice. Can you do a Trump voice?
I can't, no.
No, all right. So now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. You know that, right? Coronavirus. They're politicizing it. We did one of the great jobs. You say, how's the President Trump doing? They go, oh, not good, not good. They have no clue. They don't have any clue. They can't even count their votes in Iowa. They can't even count. No, they can't. They can't count their votes. One of my people came up to me and said, Mr. President, they tried to beat you in Russia. They didn't work out too well. They couldn't do it. They tried the impeachment hoax. That was on a perfect conversation. They tried anything. They tried it over and over. They've been doing it since you got in. It's all turning. They lost. It's all turning. Think of it. And this is their new hoax. But we did something that's been pretty amazing. We're 15 people in the massive country. Because of the fact that we went early, we could have had a lot more than that. So he was riffing on the notion that, like, the Democrats' response is effectively equivalent to how they treated him during the Russia hoax. So he's not even calling the Democrats' response necessarily a hoax. He's equivocating it to the hoax, to the Russia hoax.
Well, and not only that, whether it actually happened or not, he's actually quoting one of his people. It's not an original thought on his part. He's just relaying a story that happened.
And I mean, it makes it even more clear. You know, I can't do my own Trump, so let me go ahead and just bring up Trump making this speech himself, so that you guys can hear what it sounds like when our illustrious commander-in-chief goes off the text.
Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. You know that, right? Coronavirus. They're politicizing it. We did one of the great jobs. You say, how's President Trump doing? They go, oh, not good, not good. They have no clue. They don't have any clue. They can't even count their votes in Iowa. They can't even count. No, they can't. They can't count their votes. One of my people came up to me and said, Mr. President, they tried to beat you on Russia. That didn't work out too well. They couldn't do it. They tried the impeachment hoax. That was on a perfect conversation. They tried anything. They tried it over and over. They've been doing it since you got in. It's all turning. They lost. It's all turning. Think of it. And this is their new hoax. But, we did something that's been pretty amazing. We're 15 people in this massive country. And because of the fact that we went early, we could have had a lot more than that. We're doing great. Our country is doing so great. We are so unified.
Yeah, so I think you can see in context, he wasn't calling the coronavirus itself a hoax. He was calling the Democratic response to it. He wasn't even calling it a hoax. He was equating it to this is their new Russia hoax.
Yeah.
And that's
if you look at it, what broke this week? Nancy Pelosi launching investigation 4, is it? Into his handling of Corona.
Yeah, we are actually going to get into that. But further to the Democrat response. What was the response at the time? He wanted to shut down the borders, and what was the Democrat response? Oh, you're a racist.
Shut the border. Yeah.
Oh, you're a racist.
Racist.
Yeah, he wanted to put a hold on planes coming in from China, right? And from all people which every other country around the world was doing, right? But no. And let's, if you really want to see what the Democrats' reaction was, Tucker Carlson actually put together a great video of that. So I'll go ahead and share that with everybody right now.
To New Yorkers for coronavirus is
This is all in March.
And our city preparedness is high.
This should not stop you from going about your life, should not stop you from going to Chinatown and going out to eat. I'm going to do that today myself.
Come to Chinatown. Here we are. We're, again, careful, safe, and come join us.
There is no concern at this time for coronavirus in our region.
The Department of Sanitation is ready for Mardi Gras 2020.
The facts are reassuring.
We want New Yorkers to go about their daily lives.
But there's really no need to panic and to avoid activities that we always do as New Yorkers. We are a hardy people.
Americans do not need to panic. What I would suggest, however, is that Americans take this as a wake-up call for seasonal flu.
There's very little threat here. This disease, even if you were to get it, basically acts like a common cold or flu.
So we're telling New Yorkers, go about your lives, take the subway, go out, enjoy life, and certainly not to miss the parade next Sunday.
All right, and this goes on for a while, God. But like that was their response in early March. This was a week after Trump's speech. So, you know, if you really want to get into it, that's what the Democrats actually think. So, you know, you can't blame Trump for his response, his flippant response, and it wasn't flippant because, as Mark Green pointed out, that hasn't been his response. So you can see from that video that's how the Democrats treated this, which was to not really take it all that seriously, and of course to launch this new investigation into Trump's handling of the coronavirus. Dan, you want to get into that?
Sounds like they were encouraging or discouraging social.
They were, and now they're calling for an investigation into how it was handled. So Democrats call for an investigation to coronavirus response modeled on 9/11 Commission. Dan, do we still have you? Well, it sounds like we just lost Dan. Sorry, folks. Hopefully he will be rejoining us soon. So this is from CBS News. I'm just going to get this shared open for you. The chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee unveiled legislation to create a commission studying the government's response to the coronavirus pandemic, modeled after the commission that investigated the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. More Americans have now died from COVID-19 than were killed in the 9/11 attacks. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but the whole idea for you, and I'll just leave this up in case you guys want to read along as I'm talking about it. But the idea here is that they're launching it, that Pelosi is calling for an investigation yet again into Trump, and the people on the right are saying, go ahead, bring it. Now, as a libertarian, I hate the fact that I constantly have to defend this guy because, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of his character. And, you know, it doesn't seem that he's actually conservative nearly so much as he is, you know, a populist who says, this is what's going to be popular. This is what gets the crowds riled up. And, you know, this is what I'm going to go with. And the policy that he's instituted has been, you know, extremely conservative. It's, you know, it harkens back not to Reagan, but even as far back as Calvin Coolidge here. So we're going to launch yet another investigation for what? For the way he's handled it. I mean, we've seen Senator Green was very good about laying out exactly what has happened in terms of policy and how the Trump team has actually handled this since December 31st when the information came out. And we've seen how the Democrats have responded when Trump called for border closings, when he called for travel limitations. It was, he's a racist. We don't want any of this, right? And everyone's going to say that he disbanded the team. Well, as you saw from Senator Mark Green said, that team was reestablished in this the second week of January. So I kind of don't want to hear it from the Democrats when our response has been better than every other country's response. And that's why now, in terms of the number of tests that we have implemented here in the U.S., we're actually leading the world in the number of tests that we've actually administered since coronavirus broke out. And I don't actually have a chart for that, but if you guys follow the charts that we've been following, yeah, I would love to say, because we've been talking about this, that the number of positive tests and the number of deaths due to COVID have actually started to flatten. They did flatten for a few days. It looks like they have spiked as of late. But as far as this investigation is concerned, yeah, I say go ahead, bring it on. Bring it on, Pelosi. Watch the numbers spike again. And we're going to talk about this towards the end of the show. Yeah, then things are, as far as I can tell, it looks like he's probably the favorite in my opinion. But it looks like, too, that, come November, if you launch this investigation and this starts dominating the news, then you've pulled coronavirus and the economic problems that we've experienced as of late completely out of the news, which means that Trump's numbers are going to go up, just like they did with every other asinine investigation that you guys have launched on him. And of course, the Democrats, instead of calling for reasonable free market solutions to the coronavirus outbreak, instead of doing anything that makes any sense, they're launching these investigations. They're calling for, socialist policies. They're not calling for free market solutions, which, by the way, is what we've seen. Elon Musk just announced that he's donated, 10,000. He converted his Tesla factories to produce nothing but ventilators. He's donated, I think it was $1 million in masks. We've got Ford and GM have completely remodeled their factories so that they can start producing ventilators. Some say it's going to be too little too late, but where else are we going to get them from? The government can't do this, right? This is the free market resolving these issues. Bezos donated $100 million to Feeding America, which is a food bank. Apple donated, I think it was 50,000 masks to various hospitals. Hey, Dan, do we have you back here? No, it doesn't. All right, let's see if we can bring Dan back online here, folks. Let me go back to this and bring Dan back on. Here we go. All right, Dan's back. Great. All right, so here we go, Dan.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So, you've heard. I hope you were joined in time for the free market solutions here that seem to be bringing ventilators and masks to everybody. Did you want to chime in on any of this? Dan, do we still have you? No, sounds like we lost Dan again. Shucks, folks. Well, when Dan gets back on, hopefully we'll be able to get into that in further detail. But the big news is some actual good news that we're getting, and that is that an antibody test finally passed through the FDA. Let me get that brought up for everybody here, which I'll be doing just in a second here. So what an antibody test allows us to do is determine not only who has coronavirus, but who has had coronavirus and who has recovered, because the general thinking here is that let me see here. Yeah, here we go. So the FDA approves the first antibody test in the U.S. to detect coronavirus. We can go ahead and just read this article because I think it explains what the antibody test does and why it's such good news. The Food and Drug Administration has approved the first test in the U.S. designed to detect corona antibodies. According to a letter of authorization, widespread antibody testing can be useful in determining how many people in a population were affected with the virus and might now be immune. Up until now, all of the coronavirus tests conducted in the U.S. were designed to find fragments of the virus itself. This type of test, which uses a method called PCR to find viral RNA in nasal samples, is useful for detecting people who are currently infected with the coronavirus. So this is actually just kind of a test. It's an invasive test because basically the way it works is you get this giant swab that's like 6 inches long and it gets jammed in the back of your nose, and they have to collect samples from the back of your nose. And it's I don't know if people have described it as painful, but people have described it as somewhat traumatic in the actual test process. This test seems to be one that you don't have to deal with all of that, as this article explains. Let me bring up the article on my big screen so I can actually read all of this as soon as I can get through all of the spam for crying out loud here. All All right. So, but diagnostic tests won't be useful in identifying people who have already recovered from COVID-19. So these are the old tests. Won't be useful in identifying people who have already recovered from COVID-19, as they will no longer have detectable levels of viral RNA in their blood. These recovered patients will, however, have antibodies that fight off the virus circulating in their blood. The FDA approved this test produced by the biotech company Cellex under, I think it's pronounced Cellex, under emergency use authorization. So they normally wouldn't have approved this, which allows for the test to be used prior to gaining full approval, provided there aren't any already approved alternatives according to the FDA. Cellex's antibody test requires a blood sample that can be analyzed only in authorized labs. This takes about 15 to 20 minutes to give results, according to the letter. The test looks for two types of antibodies, immunoglobulin M and immunoglobulin G. Immunoglobulin M is the first antibody that the body makes in response to a foreign substance and can appear a couple days after infection. So it appears that there are, which I've read in several other articles, there are other tests that are on the market that aren't quite so invasive. And there are a lot of experts, as we watched in a video last week from the Ben Shapiro show, that suggest that this could actually be done using saliva, which would mean just swabbing the inside of your mouth rather than doing, a finger prick to get a little bit of a blood sample. And they seem to even be, some of these tests seem to be able to turn around a result in as few as 5 minutes. Which from what I understand too means that you may be able to administer these tests in the home in the same way that you would an early pregnancy test, for example. In contrast, the body produces large quantities of immunoglobulin G later on. The body produces large quantities of immunoglobulin G later on in the infection process. Immunoglobulin G is specific to the novel coronavirus. Positive results could either mean a person is currently infected or was recently infected by the coronavirus, according to the letter. Now, why is this important? This is important because if you have already gotten it and you have developed this autoimmune response, then this antibody response, then what that means is that you can no longer transmit the disease, because by the time you actually get it to a point where it can be transmitted, your body has completely fought it off. So what that means is that those people should be able to go back to work today. And from what everybody's been saying, it sounds like that number of people that might already have this immunoglobulin antibody running through their systems might be in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, because of the number of people that may well have had it as far back as December. Because, when the Chinese finally released the real information, it appears that the Wuhan virus originated as early as middle to early October, and may have been in the United States as early as November, and may have actually been the cause of those upper respiratory flus that people were flu outbreaks that were happening in early December in places like Connecticut, which, by the way, is one of the hardest hit states in the country as basically a New York City dependent state, and as many of their towns and communities are effectively just suburbs of New York City. Other companies in the U.S. were already making and distributing antibody tests without this authorization, but couldn't use those results to diagnose a past case of COVID-19, according to The Verge. For example, a United Biomedical antibody test was already being given to residents of Telluride, a small Colorado ski town, for free, according to a Live Science report. So again, the free market doing the job government can't do. And in fact, here in the United States, what we're looking at is government restrictions that are to the detriment of our society as a whole on the free market, which is the exact opposite of what the left has been calling for. Other countries such as China have already been conducting antibody testing for some time now. Even China has these tests, right? So this should tell you, folks, that when we get through all of this, and we will eventually get through all of this, one of the things we should really be considering is a relaxation of the ridiculous regulations brought about by the Food and Drug Administration. So Dan, I don't know if I think I can hear you now. I don't know if you can hear us, but we are talking about the antibody tests. It's the antibody article. We're about 3/4 of the way through it. Other countries such as China have already been conducting antibody testing for some time now. Both blood tests and tests that look for viral RNA when taken too early might miss cases, according to the report, which means that even with these tests, as good as they are, the number of people that have or are likely to have coronavirus is probably orders of magnitude more and larger than what's been being reported. then like we can just finish this off. Though such antibody tests could be useful in determining whether a person has COVID-19 and could now be immune to the coronavirus, is still not clear if people gain complete immunity, and if they do, how long they remain immune, according to another Live Science report. Of course, every other study that I've seen has indicated that yes, in fact, Dan, I don't see it. If you want to turn on your camera there. All right, so we're going to bring Dan into this. But yes, in fact, it appears that that if you have gotten over it and you developed an antibody response to it, that you are, for all intents and purposes, immune. So Dan, good news from the antibody reports.
Yeah, I'm hoping for it. As soon as it comes out here, I'm going to take it because I had something in February. I said this before, and several of us up here have had this thing.
So it was an upper respiratory, you think?
Oh yeah, and the two things that were big for me were I had this dry cough, couldn't cough anything up to moisten my throat. Would kick in the middle of the night. I'd have to pound the NyQuil to get back to sleep. And then I think it was the first White House press conference, at least the first one I saw in the Rose Garden, they made a comment about a sensation that you're drowning in your nose. And they said it doesn't feel like you're, not through your mouth or whatever, but it feels like through your nose. And I had that sensation. I didn't have words for it at the time because this was actually before we had the poop hit the fan. But based on the symptoms that they have described, there are quite a few of us in the New River area here north of Phoenix who feel that we've had it.
Yeah, and I'm going to take one of those too. And this is something I talked about in the show last week, that the moment we have these tests, like as much as virulent as the left's objections to getting people back to work has been, what do they have now? Like, if Dan Rice has the antibody and is immune to it, why is he not going back to work? Like, why?
I should.
Right? And if you want to go out in public life, I don't see any reason you couldn't just take the test and go back about your business. And by the way, this is why, these calls for government shutdowns are not even effective, let alone appropriate.
No.
So
I'm getting to the point where I'm just utterly confused over the whole response to this.
Yeah,
I mean, even when you're looking, did you discuss current death numbers yet? Not to be morbid.
No, I haven't. Go ahead, bring it up. I mentioned
today, 9,602 in the United States.
Okay, I mentioned
which is a fifth of the flu so far this season. 1/5. The flu CDC estimates between 22 and 55,000. So let's assume the 55,000. We're at 1/5 of that. So is the reaction appropriate to the to what we are seeing as far as what's going on? Well, not even 10,000 people.
So the experts are in agreement, and I'm kind of with them on this, that the projection seems to be that in the next week or two is when we're going to hit our daily peak. I'm assuming you don't disagree with that our peak's going to be in the next week or two, and then it's going to start.
Probably not, but we've been told this for what, 2 weeks now?
That it's going to be middle April?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it keeps getting pushed out. There was something I saw the other day, and they're talking about middle of August. I'm like, well, then it's not a 2-week incubation and 2-week sickness. It's
the middle of August.
Months.
The middle of August is when they think it's going to basically be over. So that total, by the way, of that the Trump administration has released of between 100 and 240,000 is actually one based on some of the higher estimates. Well,
but there was that one report of 2.2 million that they were trying to pin on.
Which absolutely no other report can confirm. Right.
Right. And I think it was based on, if I remember the story right, I think it was based on a wild projection of if we absolutely did nothing and sat around and all had a hug-a-thon, this is what it could be.
Yeah, they were suggesting that something like I think they were basing it on like a 4% mortality rate, and basing it on the idea that somehow like 100 million people were going to get it or something, which is wildly in excess of what everyone else seems to think. That
and to me, it doesn't match the China model.
I mean, it harkens back to what we said earlier about how, like, I bet you millions of people have already had it. And if that's the case, then our fatality rate shouldn't be the CBR, case fatality rate, CFR, that we talked about last week, where you don't just divide the number of people who have died from it by the number of people who have tested positive for it, because the number of people who have it is probably orders of magnitude larger than the number of people who have tested positive for it.
Well, and to kind of link on that, I don't think we had time to update the agenda on this, but I sent out to our editors group last night that story where the CDC is now instructing hospitals to rule all deaths as corona-related deaths, whether they can prove it or not. They're saying call it a corona death. They're trying to spike the number.
So this is another story that's from Connecticut, actually, that and I don't know how true this is or what the relevance of the truth of the matter is here, but apparently Ned Lamont is trying to politicize the first infant mortality due to COVID. No, the kid died of suffocation in the home by accident, and it turned out he had COVID. He had coronavirus. So you're right. Every death.
So they tested him after the fact, post-mortem test, and
of course they're doing post-mortem tests. That makes sense.
No, but I mean that's what it was. They had no idea he had it before he died.
Right, he was completely
he suffocated, and so now they're blaming it on that. Even though it was
an in-home accident of suffocation. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're not releasing much more information on the kid than that, but it's effectively like the kid. If the kid died in a pool drowning by accident, one of these things where it's like you're having a barbecue.
It was a pool of Corona. Right?
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, but that's just it. Like if you're reporting everyone who died and who happened to have had COVID-19 as dying because of COVID-19, then you're doing this wrong. Like the appropriate thing to do is determine the cause of death, not to determine,
what else they had.
What they necessarily had. I mean, what if
it'd be like saying everybody had died that had their appendix out when they were a kid. Oh, he's missing an appendix. That's the reason he died.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Complications due to appendectomy.
Due to lack of appendix.
Yeah. Complications of appendectomy 60 years later.
Yeah, 60 years later.
Yep.
By the way, since we don't have it to post, if anyone wanted to look it up, it was westernjournal.com that had that story. And the headline is CDC tells hospitals to list COVID as cause of death, even if you're just assuming or it contributed.
Yeah. Yep.
So you can get in a car accident on the way to the hospital because you got a mesquite thorn in your hand yesterday and die in the car accident. They test you. Oh, he actually had corona too. He must have died from that.
Yeah. I mean, you could drink yourself into oblivion at home because there's nothing better to do and choke on your own vomit. And then, you happen to have COVID-19, no symptoms.
But you cannot drink yourself to death with corona because they quit production.
Oh, God, come on. No, don't spoil the sad news. That's coming later.
Oh, did that work it in? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did manage to get that in.
To all the viewers, by the way. I'm in a bunker about 80 feet below ground, and there's this ground squirrel that I continually fight with that unplugs the antenna.
Ah, okay. All right.
We're trying to snipe them, but...
Yeah? Well, you want to talk about Chuck Schumer then? Because Schumer wrote a pretty nasty letter to Trump about appointing a drug czar, and Trump, of course, in true Trump fashion, sent him the most. Have you read the letter that Trump sent him?
I found this one, right?
Yeah, you found this article.
I found?
Oh yeah, and the letter that
I don't know if I read the letter. I read
God,
his dialogue to Schumer on the phone.
Oh
so
my
this
God.
story was, I don't know if you can pull it up. This story was Schumer made, he wanted a general or something appointed to oversee the whole corona issue. He wanted to be the corona czar, basically. And I forget what Trump's initial reaction was, but they ended up getting on the phone together. And I guess Schumer was being the idiot that Schumer usually is and the asshole that he is, getting on Trump's case, and they seemed to work it out. And the gist of the article was Trump told Schumer, well, look, here's the deal. I was in the process of writing you a nastygram. I don't know if it's gone out yet. If it hasn't gone out, I'll try to stop it. But if you do get it, I'll apologize to you for it. So he basically said, you're an asshole. I'm telling you right now that I'm sorry I wrote it, but you're still an asshole.
And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and we'll put this on screen for everybody to follow along with us. But folks, here is the ultimate Trump letter. Dear Senator Schumer, thank you for your Democrat public relations letter and incorrect sound bites, which are wrong in every way. And by the way, this is not written by one of his staff writers. It sounds like Trump. As you are aware, Vice President Pence is in charge of the task force. By almost all accounts, he has done a spectacular job, dictated, not read. The Defense Production Act has been consistently used by my team and me for the purchase of billions of dollars worth of equipment and medical supplies, ventilators, and other related items. It has been powerful leverage, so powerful that companies generally do whatever we are asking without even a formal notice. They know something is coming, and that's all they need to know. A senior military officer is in charge of purchasing, distributing, etc. His name is Rear Admiral John Polowich. I can't pronounce that. He is working 24 hours a day and is highly respected by everyone. If you remember, my team gave you this information, but for public relations purposes, you choose to ignore it. I'm bringing up page 2 on this. I'm going to have to make this a little bit bigger for myself so I can read it. We have given New York many things, including hospitals, medical centers, medical supplies, recorded numbers of ventilators, and more. You should have had New York much better prepared than you did. And as Dr. Fauci and Dr. Burke said yesterday, New York was very late in its fight response against the virus. As you are aware, the federal government is merely a backup for state governments. Unfortunately, your state needed more of a backup than most others. If you spent less time in your ridiculous impeachment hoax, which went haplessly on forever and ended up going nowhere except increasing my poll numbers and instead focused on helping people of New York, then New York would not have been so completely unprepared for the invisible enemy. No wonder AOC and others are thinking about running against you in the primary. If they did, they would likely win. Fortunately, we have been working with you in your state and city governments, Governor Andrew Cuomo and Mayor Bill de Blasio, to get the job done. You have been missing in action, except when it comes to the press. While you have stated it that you don't like Andrew Cuomo, you ought to start working alongside him for the good of all New Yorkers. I've known you for many years, but I never knew how bad a senator you are for the state of New York until I became president. I can't even finish this.
So my first comment is that absolutely was written by only one person on this planet. I doubt any staffer could have done that. A crack team of Hollywood screenwriters could not have done that letter and got it so perfect.
All right. Last sentence here, I swear. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to call, or in the alternative, call Rear Admiral Polowich. I can't pronounce that. Sincerely yours, Donald J. Trump. So that was. He's a stand-up comedian, man.
Yeah.
I know. I wish we had. In many cases, I wish we had a more dignified and measured president. But oh my god, that was worth all of the shit from the left for this week.
Like Reagan, he had poise. He knew how to work the camera based on his own previous career.
Yeah, and that nobody even looked over this. Clearly, no. Trump just put this out. And that's the funny point. So I found the paragraph that made me laugh. So obviously that letter was written by him. Yeah.
So this paragraph, after Schumer explained, this is it must have been the second. It says they had 2 telephone conversations. So this must be the second one. After Schumer explained what actions he was requesting Trump take, the president, according to Schumer's office, and this is in quotes, said he was already in the process of sending a, quote, Trump, very nasty letter, unquote, Trump, to Schumer, but he would try to stop it from going out and would apologize to Senator Schumer if he didn't stop it in time. So it sounds like it's going out, but if I get in the right mood, I'll stop it. And if I don't, I'll come back. I'm not apologizing now, but if it actually goes out, I'll apologize to you later.
That is such a false apology. I love it. Yeah. I mean, come on. It's funny. It's funny. Like the whole situation is so childish and immature. And I'm sorry. We wouldn't have had this with any other president. No other president would have done this. This is just
he knows how to, he's definitely a social media president. He knows how to troll.
Yes, this is peak trolling. This is A+ trolling on Trump's part for not only sending out the letter, but that false apology, that half-assed apology before he sent it out was just utter gold.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So, I mean, you and I love this response, even though it's kind of shitty at the same time. But the question, of course, for everyone to ask in 2020 is, how is this going to affect Trump in the polls? And I honestly think that because the Democrats could have used this whole thing to make his poll numbers go down, and could have used this to their advantage. But I think they're failing miserably. And Dan, you actually brought up this article. Ex-Obama advisor Plouffe predicts historic turnout for Trump, says Biden now at a disadvantage. So I don't know that we need to actually read the article, but I think we can just talk about like the gist of it. And I mean, you seem to think that it's going to be a landslide now too.
Mine's loading right now. We may have to go up and talk to a squirrel here in a minute. But I remember his name once I read it. It's David Fluff, and I don't know if he was the chief campaign advisor or campaign manager, but he's a huge Obama guy, and he's basically now saying that this is going to be, he's not necessarily saying landslide, but he's saying Trump's people absolutely are going to turn out this November. He's like, there's no doubt that they're all turning out, all of them, and then a couple more. And his analysis is that if the incumbents base all turns out, the challenger loses. And I guess historically, mine's not loading, but I guess historically that's the case. And that's what he's basing his comment on, is the fact that they know on your second go around, if your base doesn't turn out, then you tend to lose, which is what, go back to Bush the Elder, his no new taxes, how many people sat home of his base saying, screw you, you said no new taxes and you gave us taxes. So he lost to Clinton because his base didn't turn out.
And that makes some sense. I don't know that I don't know what the effect is going to be in states like Pennsylvania, which is actually going to be a battleground state. I don't know what the effect is going to be in states like Wisconsin, which again is going to be by all means battleground state this time around. I think that the left has pissed off the Cuban voters in Florida enough to either stay home or not, or vote the other way. In which case, I
thought Cubans typically voted Republican. They were the only Hispanic bloc that voted Republican.
Kind of.
Am I wrong on that?
Kind of. So they kind of are.
Not necessarily the new generation, but everybody prior who happened to have been on a boat.
Right. So the idea is that those who are the Florida Cubans who would have voted for somebody like Bernie or Biden are probably not going to, because Bernie pissed them off. Now there's like open movements to get Florida Cubans to vote for to not vote for Biden or Bernie. And it's almost certainly going to be Biden at this point. But yeah,
if we can get him out of his bunker.
Yeah. So, I mean, my thoughts on the matter are that's even if Trump voters turn out in droves, I think where they're going to turn out in droves for sure are places like North Dakota, Utah, Texas, right? States that Trump is almost certainly going to win anyways. I don't think that they're going to turn out in these swing states because of this necessarily, in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, the actual battleground states. Now, I think he is the favorite to win Florida because of what Bernie did to, the swing voters in Florida who are of Cuban descent, with his ponying up to Castro and his praise of the Cuban regimes.
Yeah, you can't do that to win Florida people.
Yeah, and I don't think he gets that, right? Like, okay, it's true. It may be true that their educational system was great, but like that's not what you talk about on the campaign trail. And you have to understand that people are going to get frustrated when you say things like that. Like, you know, like if you say things like Adolf Hitler treated his dogs better than anyone else ever treated pets, and you can model an animal rights program based on the way Hitler treated his dogs, well, you could do that with anyone else. Why have you chosen Hitler? Like,
right.
Like, if you want to talk about a good education system, there's a million great education systems to model your program off of. Why Cuba?
Yeah, Japan.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we all hate a lot of things that Germany does over the years, but their education system is way better than ours. They graduate their high schoolers at 16. You have to test into your high school.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And something like 60.
Overall, don't we rank like 26th?
I don't honestly know. I mean, this is just my take on our how we do education, which is way too top down. Like in Germany, you know, you test into your high school. And high school starts in 8th grade. The high school, 60% of high school students in Germany go to what is effectively tech schools, their equivalent of tech schools here.
Right.
As opposed to here, which is like 10% of students go to a vocational school in the U.S. Something like 20 to 25% go to gymnasium, which is like a college preparatory school. So that's the people that are going to go to law school. Those are your potential doctors. And they start that preparatory work in high school. And then the other 20 to 25% are remedial students.
They find out what they're finding out what the kids' aptitude is, and they're guiding them appropriately, like the guidance counselor is supposed to.
Yeah, and in 7th grade. And I think that's a great way to do this because...
Yeah, the kid that sits there and screws around during, you know, English class, but is drawing hot rods on his notebook all day long, you steer him toward the automotive program.
Yeah. Maybe the guy who learned... You know, if you can learn how to weld by the time you're 15, I mean, that's invaluable, right? Yeah. You could be making $85 an hour by the time you're 18.
Yeah.
You know, and
which is what we should do here. It's that whole, like you said, the top-down education, and it's one of the agencies I think is stupid as hell is Department of Education, and people can blast us for it, but there was no Department of Education before, depending on when you want to call the date, 1979 or 1980, when it went into effect.
Yeah.
How did George Washington get educated without the Department of Education? That's shocking.
Now, I know what people are going to say. Well, George Washington wasn't that educated. Yeah, well, nor was anyone in 1787. He would have been a child in the 1730s. But, you know, like...
Where was Oppenheimer an American? Or was he for German?
He was a German import, as in we went to Germany and
Were any people on the Manhattan Project born in America? We must have brought all Nazis over here to help us make the bomb?
The Manhattan Project's lead engineering board was almost all imports, either Soviet defectors, Nazi defectors.
How about NASA? Anybody that put people on the moon, or any of them Americans?
Well, the majority of them were, but a lot of them were direct descendants of these imports.
But they had no Department of Education that helped educate them.
Right. It didn't exist.
And we're running into all these. Basically, what it comes out is the Department of Education. They got on this kick because they're in bed with the teachers' unions and the universities, which were populated by socialists back in the 50s and 60s. The Soviets started to import that. The whole McCarthy era stuff has been proven to be accurate. That there were communists in the university system and the American government. It's all been to create an indoctrination system, essentially. And as a result, they want everyone to go to college. I don't know if they want everyone to run up the debt, if that's an intentional thing, but there's this whole thing of you're shamed if you don't go to college. If you want to go to welding school, there's some kind of shame attached to you. And why should that be?
Yeah, I mean, that's a societal thing. I don't think that's necessarily a governmental thing. Right, because we did kind of look down our nose at plumbers and electricians, as early as the 1930s. So, that's the thing where we as a society have to stop looking down our nose at these people who make 3 times anything I've ever made.
Yeah, but yeah, societal point of view, I'm talking keeping it within education. That's not education's job.
Right. And I mean, the top-down approach you're talking about, yeah. I mean, I've talked about this in I've talked about it endlessly. And if you go to the Captain Phoenix channel and look at, search for what works and what doesn't in public education, I've already done a video on this. Top-down approaches don't work because the individual needs of the students vary wildly from student to student and far exceed the 4 walls of the classroom. And the single best predictor for educational outcomes is parental involvement. So, if you take those 3 edicts into effect, I'm with you. Dissolve completely the Department of Education at the federal level. Completely dissolve it, right?
Yeah,
and,
we did fine before.
And this is something that we can learn moving forward. Like we talked about how there's another approach to the coronavirus that isn't just handing people checks. And that is saying to people, all right, at the end of the year, you're not going to have to pay any income tax. At the end of the year, and the way you make that possible is you start taking these whole departments and just goodbye. Yeah. Like the FDA, roll that back into almost nothing. Take the IRS, switch to a consumption-based tax program, and then the IRS can be a handful of people working a server farm that automates the entire process. So, that means that in April and February and March, no one is filing income tax. No one. The businesses that do these sales tax things, they do them quarterly, and it's done almost entirely. My mom actually does this. It's done almost entirely automatically.
Yeah. Well, we do. I'm in a Fortune 500 company. When we open a new store, there's a department on my floor, I believe, that's their job is they set up all of the tax, whether they have a city, county, state tax. They set each store up, and that store's computer system automatically pulls whatever tax is needed for that location and sends it to us, and then the other team sends in the check quarterly.
Right. Well, at least we're not Mexico in all of this. And it gets us to, I think it's going to be the last thing we're going to talk about before we get into Q&A, but the very, very sad story that is with all this corona news, the saddest news about corona is that Mexico stops brewing Corona beer deemed non-essential in this epidemic. And it's a very short article, so sad news, everybody. Pour one out for your homies. Mexico's Grupo Modelo said on Thursday it will temporarily stop brewing Corona beer and other brands exported to 180 countries after its business activities were declared non-essential under a government order aimed at curbing the spread of coronavirus. The Mexican government this week declared a health emergency and ordered the suspension of non-essential activities. The brewer said in a statement that the suspension will go into place on Sunday. Quote, if the federal government considers it appropriate to issue some clarification confirming beer as an agro-industrial product at Grupo Modelo, we are ready to execute a plan with more than 75% of our staff working from home at the same time guaranteeing the supply of beer, a statement said. Grupo Modelo operates 11 breweries in Mexico. So sad news coming from our Spanish-speaking neighbors south of the border.
This is my direct neighbor. I share a border with these guys, and this is sad indeed because, okay, you're stuck in your house. What's the only thing to do other than day drink? And night drink, and then day drink some more.
Right? Day drink, night drink, day drink, night drink. Yeah. I mean, you could go fishing, but
not,
what do you take with you when you go fishing?
Not here. You cannot. They shut the lakes down today. Don't even suggest fishing.
Okay, so here in Tennessee, we have a less draconian system where they have... Let's talk about some of the stupid state order mandates that have come down from each state. Here in Tennessee, state mandate, well, it's actually a city mandate. The city blockaded parking lots at King Creek Park, but allowed you to park across the street over at the rec center as a way, as a response to COVID-19, as a way to protect the health and safety of our residents by concentrating them all in one parking lot. You retards! Like,
yeah,
the local Walmart is now has barricaded two of their entrances to funnel everyone in like fucking cattle to one entrance, which is exactly what the appropriate response.
Yeah,
and now they've
it's ironic that you tell me this today before we come on, because I was thinking about it earlier today. these stores are going to these modified hours. Instead of being open from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. or whatever, they're going like an 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.
So
you still have 1,000 people that need to shop today. So instead of spreading them out over a 16-hour period, now you condense those same 1,000 people into a 10-hour period.
Which is what I said last week. These stores should be expanding their hours if they're trying to, like, I get it. If you're going to reduce hours because you've had such a reduction in foot traffic that you can't afford to be open from 10 to 12, fine.
That's a legitimate reason.
Fine,
yeah.
but if you're doing this to ensure the safety, to ensure the public health and safety of our patrons, then fucking open up longer, you morons. Like,
right. Well, and this sort of goes, I won't say the name of my company because I'm not, authorized by media department to say it, but my company actually looked at these places that are not necessarily that, but the senior hours that they're doing.
Yeah.
That usually these some of these companies, and I'm not putting these companies down, they made a business decision that they think is right. But our executive leadership team looked at that, and they actually saw lines of people grouped up waiting for that senior hour in the morning. And this is actually the segment of the population most at risk, grouped up together, waiting for their one special hour, even though they're not banned from the other hours. This is just their special hour.
You know what, Dan? I'm actually going to go against that because if they don't have coronavirus, then they should be grouped together because then they would be isolated from the people who have coronavirus.
What about the one person?
Well, I mean, I don't have a response to that.
There's that Betty that's in the group, and she's the hugger. She's hugging everyone she hasn't seen in a week. You just contaminated that entire group of elderly people.
Yeah, the chain smoker that's got the chain smoker.
Ironically, my cousin she's in Ohio now. She did a post today. She's like, just so everyone knows, I have chronic asthma, so I cough all the time.
I can imagine her going to the grocery store and coughing, because of the asthma, and then like 10 people looking around her like, shying away like Homer going into the bushes.
Into the bushes, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, it's sad news that came from Mexico here. I don't care if you don't like Corona. I like Corona, and I like Modelo Especial. And you know what? The more beer out there, the better. The more Mexican beer we have, the cheaper American beer gets. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So all right. So let's see if we've gotten.
Yeah, I can't see the questions right now.
All right.
I think I saw my friend Christina was watching. I don't know if she asked any questions.
Yeah, I don't see anything coming in. Oh golly, did the stream completely collapse? I hope the stream didn't crash.
Uh-oh.
Well, folks, if it hasn't crashed, we don't have any questions, so we're going to hurry up and sign off and see
we'll wrap it up for today.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
All right. See you later. Next week.